Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to CADCA's 25th Anniversary National Leadership Forum. Please welcome CADCA Chairman and CEO, General Arthur T. Dean.
Good morning. Welcome. Our 25th anniversary. What an awesome accomplishment. Thank you so very much for being here. On behalf of everyone at CADCA, welcome to our 25th Forum. We are more than 2,600 strong. We represent every state and territory. We have 12 international countries represented. I just spoke to a delegate here from Turkmenistan, where we have built 8 coalitions in the last couple of years. We have representatives from the country of Ghana, Uruguay, and as I said, from 12 different international countries around the world. You can see the map of those international attendees, and we're excited to have them join us. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you. We have representatives from the Marshall Islands and Paui who have traveled more than 8,000 miles to be with us today, and what an accomplishment on their behalf, and we're excited to have them here as well. The coalition movement is a global movement that is extremely successful, and it's successful because you utilize a strategy that is a multi-sector strategy that causes you to change your communities and transform them. So I want to personally, before I introduce any of our special guests and distinguished visitors, I want to thank you, the members of the coalition movement. I want to thank you for implementing an effective strategy in your community that has been adopted around the world. And let me please applaud you and thank you for your successful work as a way to start this conference. Thank you. All week we're going to be celebrating you, going to celebrate in the coalition movement. We're going to talk about our successes. We have all kinds of wonderful training sessions for you, many awards to be given out, and a wonderful celebration dance on Wednesday night. But we started it yesterday with the SAMHSA's CSAP Prevention Day. That's the 11th year that we have connected with SAMHSA to put on their Prevention Day, and what a success it really was yesterday. And I want to applaud my friends at SAMHSA for their support and their leadership, and especially for Administrator Pam Hyde and Director Francis Hardin for their great leadership and support. So let's applaud them, please. Thank you. Today we have a special treat for you. You're going to hear from some of the premier leaders in the United States, those that are part of our history, that helped us forge this movement, and that have sat in the seat of the Director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy and supported many administrations as we moved forward. We are excited that they're going to be here, excited that you're going to be able to hear from them. And I think most of you know that CADCA was formed in October of 1992 as a result of President Bush's Drug Advisory Council. 3 of the people that were on that council are going to be with us this week as well. We are excited about that. And I want to give you a quick look back at what President Bush had to say about this movement in 1992.
The point is simple. No community, none at all, has to accept drug abuse. Americans don't have to live in fear. Drugs and so many other social problems can be driven from every community if every community cares enough to reach out and try. Americans deserve a lot of credit for their individual and collective efforts, but we still have much to do.
You know, what President Bush said back in 1992 truly remains true today. We are excited about this movement, so I want to bring to the stage now a wonderful professional who is going to lead our discussion this morning and help us moderate this distinguished panel of leaders that we have. I want you to help me introduce and give a warm welcome, but before I do, I want to give you just a little bit of information about Susan Page. This professional has interviewed 8 presidents. She's covered 9 presidential campaigns. She has reported from 5 continents and dozens of countries around the world, from Vietnam to New Zealand to Saudi Arabia and to China. She serves now as the Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today. She's extremely well qualified to lead our panel, and I introduce to you Susan Page. Susan, please come on up.
Good morning. Thank you, General Dean. I'm so honored to be here today at the CADCA Forum to host what I know is going to be an historic session. 2,500 community coalition leaders, and I bring you greetings from Robert Dickey, who is the CEO at my company, the Bennett Company, and a proud member of your board of directors. Now, he told me you were an opinionated group. Actually, he warned me that you were an opinionated group. I mean, you look perfectly nice to me, so I don't know what he was worried about. But in any case, we're going to take questions throughout the plenary session. We're going to do it the modern way. So if you want to submit a question to one of the former drug czars who's going to be on our panel in just a little bit, please use the hashtag CADCA Forum, CADCA FORUM, and we will get to as many questions as possible during that part of the program. Now I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing you to today's keynote speaker. As you all know, the Office of National Drug Control Policy is part of the Executive Office of the President, part of the White House. It advises the President on drug control issues, coordinates drug control activities and related funding across the federal government. It produces the annual National Drug Control Strategy, and leading these efforts now is its acting director, Michael Botticelli. Previously, he served as Deputy Director of National Drug Control Policy, and prior to that, he was Director of the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. There, he expanded innovative and nationally recognized prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery services. He is a big supporter of your efforts and your National Youth Leadership Initiative, and in a demonstration of courage, he acted as town mayor at the mock city council meeting with youth at CADCA's NYLI program last summer. Being mayor can be a tough job, whether it's real or not. So to provide us with an update on National Drug Control Strategy, please welcome Acting Director Michael Botticelli.
Good morning, everybody. It's really hard to top this introduction, in terms of Mission Possible. But I really want to thank particularly General Dean and CADCA as they celebrate their 25th anniversary for all of the great work that they do. All anybody has to do, and particularly me, has to look at the faces in this room to see the vital role that CADCA plays in protecting our youth and our communities across this country, and quite honestly, globally. Thank you for all you have done, and please, I'd really like to offer a round of applause to CADCA and their staff. You know, I have to be careful to be impartial in my job, but I do have to say that this is one of the events, and CADCA events are one of the things that I look forward to most. And I do that because it is really inspiring for me to see the faces of our youth of our country and across throughout this country, to feel the energy and the spirit that inhabits this room and the work that you do. You know, as Susan talked about, last July I had the privilege of working with many of the youth at CADCA's Mid-Year Training Institute in Orlando, and a group of young people in CADCA's National Youth Leadership Initiative, or NYLI as we all know it to be, participated in a mock city council hearing as an element of their training. So the topic of their council meeting was the very current issue of legalizing medical marijuana. The participants presented pros and cons of their arguments to a make-believe council, and I was invited to participate in that meeting. And in fact, for that session, as Susan talked about, I got to play the role of Mayor Botticelli. So, you know, I have to say it's probably an easier job than the job I'm in now. But you know, I was incredibly impressed not only by the logic and the sophistication of the arguments presented during the debates, but by the passion and commitment shown by these youth. And I think all of you who, the youth in this room and the people and the adults who work with them, understand the sophistication and the passion and commitment of our youth on a daily basis. After the session, I spoke with many of these young people and heard how some of them became involved in NYLI. There were stories of growing up with parents who had substance use disorders, of being surrounded by peers who regularly take drugs. These young people are so impressive because they are not only to try to rise above the influence in their own lives, they are working and making a difference in their own communities. So I'd like to take a moment this morning to recognize the young people who are here today. They are making a difference as youth leaders in their coalitions, in their schools, and in their communities. So please, let's have another round of applause for the youth and the work that they do. I think we all know that this work is sometimes not easy. It is sometimes not popular. But every day we must remember that our work matters. What we do makes a difference in the lives of countless youth and their communities across the United States. I'd like to turn for a minute to the President's budget proposal, which was released this week, as a matter of fact, yesterday. I know that the budget has enormous significance to the work we all do and represents how this administration views drug policy in the United States. The President has released a budget that provides a clear plan to strengthen the middle class and help America's hardworking families. And it does so while achieving fiscal sustainability and promote sustainable growth. However, we all know all too well that illegal drug use has consequences that stand in the way of this progress. In 2013, 120 people died every day on average from drug overdoses. Let me say that again. 120 people died on average every day from drug overdose in the United States. In 2007, the healthcare, crime, and lost productivity costs due to illicit drug use were estimated by the Department of Justice to total $193 billion. The administration has ensured that federal funding supports the strategy, which balances public health and public safety efforts. In total, the President is requesting $27.6 billion in FY 2016 to improve public health and public safety. This represents an increase of more than $1.2 billion, or 4.7%, over 2015. The Obama administration has ensured that federal funding to address the public health aspects of this issue has increased every single year. It's important to note that the portion of the budget request for demand reduction efforts, prevention, treatment, and recovery efforts continue to grow, and it's at its highest level in over 13 years. I know. The President's $12.3 billion request for treatment and prevention is almost 7% higher than that was enacted in 2015. $9.7 billion in federal resources are requested in 2016 to support domestic law enforcement efforts. And the request also includes $5.5 billion for interdiction and international support efforts. Spearheaded by HHS, the Department of Education, federal resources totaling $1.4 billion support education and outreach programs aimed at preventing the initiation of drug use, while encouraging community outreach efforts focused on getting those who have begun to use illicit drugs to end their use, a nearly 6% increase over the 2015 level. Major highlights of the prevention request include $364 million, or 20% of the $1.8 billion substance abuse prevention and treatment block grant, a minimum set aside for prevention efforts. $62 million will fund the Department of Education's School Climate Transformation Grant Program to help create positive school climates. $401 million is requested for research at the National Institute on Drug Abuse and the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism to bring to practice evidence-based prevention knowledge and programming. $211 million will fund SAMHSA's prevention programs of regional and national significance, including $118 million for SAMHSA's Strategic Planning Framework State Incentive Grants, or SPIFSIG as those of us call it, and $12 million for grants to prevent prescription drug and opioid-related overdose deaths by helping states purchase naloxone, equip first responders, and support prevention education. $68 million will enable the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to expand its prescription drug overdose prevention for states programs to all 50 states. An additional $6 million will fund collection of emergency room data and higher quality and timely mortality data. And finally, $85.7 million is requested for the Drug-Free Communities program. In short, the FY16 budget reflects a balanced, evidence-based approach working toward building a healthier, safer, and prosperous community. And now I'd like to provide you with an update on the administration's approach to preventing and reducing drug use. We will issue a new national drug control strategy soon, and it will begin, as it has before, with an emphasis on prevention. Preventing substance use before it begins is the most effective way to reduce drug use and its consequences and ensure a healthier society. Prevention is at the heart and soul of drug policy. We are here today because we share a common goal. We care about the future. We care about our young people. And we know that to build a better future for our youth, we must help them make the right choices and help them reject drugs and alcohol. Substance use hampers the ability of young people to achieve their full potential. It limits their future and creates barriers where doors of opportunity should be open. Youth substance use is associated with lower academic performance, higher truancy and dropout rates, unemployment, violence, and higher HIV and STD rates. Substance use prevention must remain an integral part of education policies and programs if we are to achieve our goals as a nation. And we are heartened by some recent surveys on drug use, and you all should be heartened by that information. This year's Monitoring the Future survey provides generally encouraging news, with the use of alcohol and cigarettes and the misuse of prescription pain relievers declining and many other forms of drug use holding steady at low levels among high school teens. However, there are significant areas of concern as we look at that data. The survey highlighted the growing concerns over the high rate of electronic cigarette use. And especially concerning is the softening attitudes, particularly in perception of harm and disapproval of marijuana use. School-age children are continuing to view marijuana use as a benign substance. And past experience shows us that when perception of risk goes down, use typically goes up. Our strategy is guided by science, and we remain concerned that despite research demonstrating how substance use negatively affects brain development and functioning, this information is being lost. Too many images and messages that youth receive reduce the perception that substance use, including marijuana and alcohol, are harmful. We know that youth understand the harmful effects of tobacco. We have 50 years of effective public health strategies, and many of you are focusing on that work as well. And our survey continues to show downward trends. We can credit the effective public health messaging campaigns and various other public health strategies that show the harmful effects of tobacco use. And today, more young people smoke marijuana than tobacco. Let me say that again. And today, more young people smoke marijuana than tobacco. We can applaud our anti-tobacco advocates in our efforts, but we must also redouble our efforts to do the same for marijuana and alcohol use. I think we all know that legalization and commercialization efforts, which have resulted in increased availability, make our job of reducing marijuana use all the more difficult. And this issue remains of vital concern to all of us. As I have often said, the administration opposes the legalization of marijuana because we believe this approach runs counter to the mission of ensuring the health and safety of all Americans. And like yourselves, we remain committed to doing everything in our power to protect young people from illicit drugs and their consequences. Clearly, we have our work cut out for us. As many of you know, I'm in recovery from a substance use disorder. And I have sometimes wondered why and what my life journey and life trajectory would have been if there had been a drug-free coalition in my town, if I had been a member of the coalition, if I had been a participant in NYLI. Would it have changed my experience and prevented me from developing a disorder? And I like to think that the answer is yes. So I'm asking you today to redouble your efforts as we redouble our efforts to prevent drug use. We need you and the prevention professionals across this country to continue your work and to not be discouraged. We also need new strategies and efforts nationwide. To influence the public dialogue and helping build a strong and healthy nation, your work, your success is more critical than ever. As coalition leaders and active members of your communities, you have a powerful voice and are ideally positioned to bring good science, valid data, and effective prevention strategies to implement local responses to local drug use issues. As local agents of change, living side by side with others in your community, you are also best positioned to respond quickly and effectively to emerging challenges such as synthetic drugs and drug driving. You will see problems long before we at the federal level do. And you will have the infrastructure, the knowledge, the tools, the relationships necessary to respond to those problems and inform us accordingly. You can and you will save lives and make a difference, not only in your communities, but throughout this nation and throughout the world. Of course, we will continue to provide support to what has become the prevention cornerstone of our national drug control strategy, the Drug-Free Community Support Program. Since 1997, the DFC program has been the nation's leading effort to mobilize communities to prevent drug use. There is no better example of community-wide drug use prevention in action, and the program's effectiveness is well documented. Our national evaluation of the DFC program continues to find that substance use has declined significantly in DFC-funded communities. Each Drug-Free Communities Coalition leverages federal funds to create solutions that are tailored to the unique circumstances of a local area and that resonate with people in a given community. Since its inception, the DFC program has funded more than 2,000 community coalitions and positively influenced the lives of countless thousands of at-risk youth. Today, DFC mobilizes nearly 9,000 community volunteers. In 2014, 680 DFC grants were awarded in 49 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, and the Federated States of Micronesia. And the President's budget request for 2016 includes $85.7 million to support that program. Thanks to all of you, DFC continues to have widespread support in Congress and in the administration. 2 weeks ago, we released the FY 2015 Drug-Free Communities Request for Applications. For those of you who aren't currently DFC-funded coalitions, we encourage you to apply. I ask our current grantees to please spread the word to neighboring communities. DFCs make a difference. You all represent the success of Drug-Free Community Support Program. And before I leave, I want to leave you today with a quote from the President. He said, "One voice can change a room. And if one voice can change a room, then it can change a city. And if it can change a city, it can change a state. And if it can change a state, it can change a nation. And if it can change a nation, it can change the world. Your voice can change the world." On behalf of the entire ONDCP team, thank you again for your commitment to strengthen communities and protect America's youth. It is an honor to stand before you today. to join in partnership with you and to support you as together we work to protect our young people and give them safe, healthy, and drug-free lives. Thank you very much.
That was great. Thanks. Director Botticelli, thank you so much for sharing your insights, and we appreciate you taking a few minutes to answer questions from our audience. Now I see people already stepping up to the mics, I hope. If you have a question for the director, please just go to one of these 3 mics that are set up in the aisles, or you can also send us questions via Twitter. Just use the hashtag CADCA Forum. Let's take a question from Twitter from Ironic Mom, because I do love Twitter handles. Here's a question. How important is it that funding for universal or primary prevention be protected? I'm assuming you think that would be pretty important.
We do think it's pretty. We do think it's pretty important. And, you know, there are various ways that we, particularly through the National Drug Control budget, look at supporting primary prevention and universal activities. One of the primary ways we do that is through, I think all of you know that one of the primary funding mechanisms to the states is the Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment Block Grant. So part of what we do is ensure that at least 20% of that block grant goes for primary prevention activities for substance use services. I think the other piece that we focus on is, of course, through the Drug-Free Community Grant Program. This is a really important program that our office administers. We want to make sure that we're getting that money out to communities. We know that when you look at it from an economic standpoint, that prevention, primary prevention saves money. Not only does it save lives, but it saves money in the long run in terms of healthcare costs and crime. And it also promotes positive outcomes in many, many other areas. So we really know and want to make sure that our strategy focuses on primary prevention activities.
So we have someone, I think, at this mic here. Sir, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Director. I'm Derek Franklin from the state of Washington, City of Mercer Island Communities That Care Coalition. And it's a question. Many of us in prevention have equated marijuana legalization with big tobacco, you know, coining the phrase big marijuana. Is there anything you can tell us about how ONDCP is treating this differently in terms of the possible onset of a whole industry that we're facing across the country?
Sure. You know, so one of the reasons why ONDCP and the administration has been opposed to legalization is twofold. One, you know, we have abundant scientific research that looks at the health harms of marijuana, and particularly marijuana's effect on youth. So we know that regular marijuana use reduces IQ. It reduces academic performance. It leads to addiction, and particularly issues around lifelong consequence from early use. But the other issue that I think you've raised that is particularly important is the role that the millions and billions of dollars that are flowing into this industry and the impact that will have on particularly on youth. So I think that we have, you know, abundant cause for significant concern when we see big marijuana taking pages of the playbook that big tobacco and, quite honestly, that alcohol have played for a very long time. You know, I am not an economist, but it doesn't take an economist to understand that investors want their money back. And they are not going to get their money back from an occasional user of marijuana. They're going to get their money back by heavy users of marijuana, by starting people at a very young age and breeding lifelong customers. So I think we have significant concern about creating, quite honestly, another big tobacco. We spent billions of dollars over the course of 50 years, lost countless lives as it's related to tobacco use. And I think we, like many of you, are really concerned about the role not only of legalization, but what the commercialization of marijuana is going to mean and what it's going to mean for the youth of our country. If any of you saw it, there was a great policy piece by the American Academy of Pediatrics that just came out last week that took a position against both legalized marijuana and medical marijuana. And I love the way that they framed it, Because what they said was, and I believe this, is that the youth of our country and the impact of marijuana on youth of our country should be the first and only point of consideration as we look at marijuana in the United States. And I think we all can use and all agree that our prime concern should be the youth of this country.
But just to follow up on that great question, is this an argument that politically you're losing? Because we see more states and communities moving toward decriminalization of marijuana, legalization of marijuana, and the younger you are, we find in polling, the more likely you are to support that idea. So is this an argument that is failing to catch hold in the court of public opinion?
I think the way that I talk about it, I don't think that, so part of my concern is that this is very well-financed campaigns, and we have millions of dollars going into this. And my concern is that, quite honestly, the misinformation that proponents of legalization have been getting out there, that marijuana is not addictive, that marijuana doesn't have the negative health consequences, that it's safer than other substances that we have out there. So it's been a challenge, and I know it's been a challenge for our office, and it's been a challenge for many of these prevention professionals in the room here in terms of making sure that we have good, accurate information. And to pretend that it hasn't been a challenge, I think, is being disingenuous. That it really has been a tough challenge to get the word out, a good, accurate, scientific research information on that.
Let's take another question. Yes, sir. Please go ahead. Tell us who you are.
Yes, Will McAllister, Director of the Reckless Drug-Free Coalition for Poto Public Schools in Poto, Oklahoma. Director Botticelli, I just wanted to say that it was extremely motivating and inspirational to hear that you yourself are recovering from substance abuse. It's awesome to have a director at the helm who has experience like that. That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. As someone new to this position, I'm constantly brainstorming for strategies to take the fight to the abuse program in my area, and an idea that one thing that would very much help me, and an idea that I had, and feel free to decline, that's absolutely fine, but I was interested to know if you would be willing to share specifically what substance you are recovering from, because I plan to use that for motivation for our youth in our area.
Great, thank you. One of the reasons, I just want to say this, that, I'm really fortunate that I'm in recovery. But my story is not unique. I am one of 23 million Americans who are in recovery in the United States, and we need to tell that story. But here's how I relate my story to the work that you do. It didn't have to happen. It didn't have to happen. And part of it is, and I really mean this, I think about what it would mean if my town had a DFC coalition, if I was part of the movement, if I was in a community that had a community norm that really supported youth in making positive decisions. And because that wasn't the norm in my community. So we know that it doesn't have to happen that way, that we have prevention activities, that we have brief intervention to identify people who are developing problems along the way. So the other piece that I think is particularly important is that, the cost of untreated addiction in the United States can really be, and I think we know this from data, that there's still too much stigma attached to the disease of addiction, and we know it keeps people from getting care. So I think all of us in recovery, and all of us who love people in recovery, have an obligation to tell our story clearly. We know, when we've seen in other public health related issues, whether it's HIV or cancer, that when affected people come out about their own experience, it diminishes stigma and it increases the probability that people are going to get care. So, I think we're seeing a sea change across the United States in terms of that work.
We have time for another question. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Liz Berardi. I'm here first as the mother of Carter Berardi, who died of a heroin overdose at 23 1 year ago. I'm also here as a coalition member from the Hudson Valley, and the founder of...
Did you say the Hudson Valley?
Yes, near your hometown.
I'm an upstate New York boy.
Yes. Ulster County, actually. So, yeah. And also the founder of Safe Sober Living. And my question is about treatment and the continuum of care. I'm wondering, much like Thomas McClellan, talking about rating treatment centers, what your feelings about that are, and also understanding NAR and sober living regarding the continuum of care. I'm wondering about standards of safety.
Great, thanks. Thanks for your questions, and I'm sorry about your loss. It inspires those of us who do this work on a daily basis to make sure that we don't see the astounding number of overdoses continue. We need parents helping us because you're the ones that change opinion in terms of the work that we need to do. So thank you for your willingness to come forward. So many of you knew Dr. Tom McClellan, who used to be the deputy director at ONDCP, and quite honestly, we have much to thank him for in terms of the work that he did. But one of the pivotal things that Dr. McClellan talked about is that substance use, and we all know this, is a chronic disease. And unfortunately, that we are still treating this as an acute and episodic condition. So we think 5 days of detox is going to be enough for someone to cure them, and we don't. And what he showed us was that remaining attached to treatment and recovery support services is one of the most critical things that we can do to move people on the path to long-term recovery. So again, I think that there's, one of the things and one of the exciting things that I think is important about doing this work is the implications of the Affordable Care Act to make sure that people have access to care, and not just acute care, that they have access to a whole continuum of services. I think one of the things that I hear continually as I travel across the country in terms of what we need to support people's ongoing recovery are housing and employment. So part of what we're trying to focus on in our efforts and our partners at SAMHSA and across the board and with HUD is making sure that we have good supportive housing programs for people in long-term recovery. And quite honestly, that criminal histories are not a barrier for people to get those housing services. So, so I think we have a ways to go. And the last piece that you mentioned I think is particularly important is one of the things that we have been focusing on and our partners of SAMHSA have been focusing on is making sure that our treatment programs are offering the best evidence of care that we have. I think many of you know that too many of our treatment programs don't include medication-assisted treatment as part of their standard of care, and that has to change. We have too many people who are dying from opiate overdoses and who are getting treatment and are never offered medication as part of the other services, and that can't happen anymore.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your question, and we're so sorry for your loss. We have time, I think, for just one more question. Next person up.
Good, thank you. Hi. Ooh, I'm loud.
Use that voice.
There we go. There we are. I am Anne Marie Galvin from the great state of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm the coordinator for the Situate Facts Coalition, and we have had great success getting many voices at the table. And I think probably the most powerful sector that we have had, I get emotional when I talk about this stuff.
Okay.
One of the most powerful voices we've had in our coalition has been the recovery voice. People in long-term recovery, young and old, to share their story and their lived experience. And I wonder why that is not a required sector for DFC grantees. I'd like to ask you to make that the 13th sector.
I have a confession to make that I actually did not know that that was not one of the...
it's a missing piece. It sometimes happens naturally. Some people are in long-term recovery and are parents or teachers or work in the field. The closest thing we have is a substance use disorder treatment provider is a requirement, but there should be a recovery person always as part of the conversation. It's very impactful.
Good. So we'll be happy to look at that because I do think they're powerful voices.
Great. Thank you.
So the other piece, and I just had a conversation with some community coalitions who are doing great work with kids of color. And one of the things that we talked about is, there's nothing more powerful than a story, right? People's personal stories. And on the prevention side, we probably could do a better job at telling really good stories, just as we do on the recovery side, about the work that we do and really telling and using personal stories in ways that the recovery community has done for a really long time. So I really thank you for your suggestion. I think it's a really valuable one, and we'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
Director Botticelli, let me thank you for joining us today,
Thank you,
and especially for taking questions. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
shelves. You can just hear it, please. Thank you. Well, that was terrific and wonderful to hear kind of the personal side of things from Michael Botticelli's story. Now we're going to hear from some of the other leaders who have held this remarkable post. You know, only 7 people in history have served as drug czar, and we have 5 of them here this morning, which is remarkable. In fact, it is unprecedented. There have never been so many drug czars, current and former, in one place at one time before. And I was asking in the green room beforehand what you call a gathering of drug czars. Bill Bennett suggested gaggle. General McCaffrey wanted a moniker that included the word eagle. In any case, we have a quorum of drug czars, and we're really pleased for that. Now, I know that some of you in the ballroom were here from the very beginning of this coalition movement, although some of you were not even born 25 years ago when it got started. We welcome you all here today. Today, on the 25th anniversary, we welcome 4 previous drug czars whose federal service spans that quarter century. And their full bios are available to you in your program and on the web. So I'm just going to briefly introduce them as I ask them to come forward and take their seats here on stage. They've been parked here on the first row. And so if you could all come forward now. Yes, stand up. Yes, I'm telling you, stand up, walk forward, and I'll tell people who you are. Thank you so much. Dr. William Bennett was the first drug czar, the first director of the ONDCP. He served under President H.W. Bush. It was so great to see President Bush's face up there in that program. Our thoughts are with him now as he's in ailing health in Texas. Bill Bennett also served as Secretary of Education. In 2000, he co-founded K-12, an online education company. He is the author of the bestseller Book of Virtues. I actually bought one for my kids back in the day, and they turned out pretty well, so thank you for whatever role you had in that. He's now host of a nationally syndicated radio program called Morning in America, and today a new book of his is being published. It has an apt title. It's entitled Going to Pot. Please welcome Bill Bennett. Dr. Lee P. Brown, the third director, served under President Bill Clinton. He began his career in law enforcement as a patrolman in San Jose, California. He served as New York City's police commissioner, as the police chief of Houston, as Atlanta's public safety commissioner. He's written many articles in papers on police management and community policing and crime. He's the co-author of the book Police and Society, an Environment for Collaboration and Confrontation. Welcome, Dr. Brown. General Barry McCaffrey served as the fourth director, also under President Clinton. He is a retired 4-star general who has earned 3 Purple Hearts and twice been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and the Silver Star. Thank you for your service, General. General McCaffrey was leading ONDCP when the Drug-Free Communities Program was launched. Now he is a national security and terrorism analyst for NBC News and president of a consulting firm that's based in Arlington, Virginia. Thanks for being here, General McCaffrey. And John P. Walters, the fifth director under President George W. Bush. He had been chief of staff for Dr. Bennett at ONDCP. He also worked in the Department of Education, the National Endowment for the Humanities. He was president of the Philanthropy Roundtable. In January 2009, he became executive vice president of the Hudson Institute. Welcome, Mr. Walters. I'm going to sit down and pose some questions to our panelists. And I'm also going to encourage you to send us questions via Twitter. We're not going to take questions from the mics for this forum, but we would like to take questions from the audience. So just send a tweet using the hashtag CADCA forum, and we'll take as many of those as we can. So welcome. You know, it's got such a wonderful span of history with the service of the four of you, and I wonder if we could start by just asking. I'd like to see how things have changed and not changed over the many years of your service by asking you, when you took over as director of this office, what was the single biggest drug-related problem you felt the nation faced? What was the single biggest thing that you wanted to focus on? Bill Bennett, let's start with you.
Cocaine. That was the focus. That was the interest. That was the front page story. In the hearings, I was the first drug czar. And at the hearings where I was confirmed, Chairman Biden, then Chairman Biden, now Vice President Biden, made it plain to me that we were going after illegal drugs. We weren't. Our charge was not alcohol, not beer, but illegal drugs, focus on cocaine, particularly crack, but other drugs as well, since there's a connection. And since it remains true that not everybody who starts with marijuana goes on to other drugs, it is also true that people who use a lot of drugs usually start with marijuana. So, and that needs to be said over and over again. But that's where the country's attention was. And let me just say that this was one great advantage that I had. I came into the job with the country's attention. It was a front page story. The president gave his inaugural address, talked about the drug czar job, talked about me, put the country on notice that he was going to take it very seriously, and he did, spoke to it often, visited places that I asked him to visit, and made it a front and center issue. The questions then were questions of organization. How does it work? How does the drug czar office work with other people? Do you sit at the cabinet table? Do you sit behind the cabinet table? The most important thing was to insist on, and I insisted on it, getting budget authority over those parts of the other departments' budgets, which had to do with drugs. Budget authority in Washington is an important thing. Ask Paul Ryan. Ask any chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. Having that budget authority meant you had real authority. To be able to have rhetorical authority, that's up to you. But budget authority was a real thing, and we used it.
Lee Brown, when you took over, what did you see as the biggest problem you wanted to tackle?
I came into the position from a law enforcement background where I saw the impact of drugs on the streets of our cities. And just as Dr. Bennett stated, cocaine was the major problem, both powder cocaine as well as crack cocaine. But that also was accompanied by the problem of violence on the streets of our city. We saw so much violence associated with drug dealing, fighting for turfs on the cities for those who were selling drugs. And those are the issues that I saw when I came in. But at the same time, I also saw, as the research indicated, an increase in youth drug use at the time. And so those are the issues that we addressed when I became the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. I'm delighted that Dr. Bennett fought for the budget control. I held out to become a member of the cabinet, so I sat on the president's cabinet during the time I served there.
General McCaffrey, what was your biggest single concern? What did you think was the biggest drug problem facing the nation?
I always qualify that by saying I was a reluctant volunteer to be the drug czar. You know, the president asked me to come in that office. I was a serving four-star general. I told him why I didn't want to do it and who should do it, and offered him 3 names, and then offered him a strategy to move ahead. Then I went home and talked to my dad, and he said, "Shut up and do what the president asked you to do." So it was clearly, bar none, the most important thing I ever did in my life. As we looked at it, we thought there were several challenges. Probably the most intractable was the stigmatization of people involved in addiction. We knew there were 12 to 14 million people out there that needed help. We knew there was a lot of science, the National Institute of Drug Abuse and NIAAA. We had protocols that could get them into recovery. We knew how to maintain sobriety through relapse prevention. We knew a lot, but it wasn't being effective. And part of it was nobody wanted to deal with drug addicts. So we wanted to change that. And then I think the most important thing we rapidly learned was, look, there's 315 million of us. Most of us don't abuse drugs or alcohol. So we wanted a prevention education message that worked. And we needed to do that through the communication strategy.
You know, Barry McCaffrey, given the remarkable things you've done in your life, I think it's striking that you say this was the most important thing.
Bar none.
I did.
Absolutely, the most useful thing. You know, I think the four of us would probably agree. When you look at America, we're basically in extremely good condition. The economy, the American people's values, you name it, the country's just a model in the international community. When you find something you don't like about America, invariably it's related to the abuse of alcohol or illegal drugs. That's what's happening in the prison system. If you want to understand drug abuse, talk to a cop, a social worker, a municipal judge, or an emergency room physician. And they understand all about the devastating impact on people's lives. So, you know, I think probably the four of us would agree that it's a huge public health threat, it's a law enforcement threat, it's a work-related issue. It's something we just have to focus on. And by the way, we're now in trouble. The country has walked away from what was a greater common recognition of the impact of drugs on American society.
John Walters, when you took over, what was the single biggest problem you thought you faced? Or the country faced?
Yeah, I think in retrospect it's easy to see that the claims of marijuana as medicine, the beginning of legalization, which we worked on. I was the first director to go into states that had ballot initiatives and stand with people who were doing prevention and treatment and public safety. And we were criticized for why is Washington coming to our state, but the crazy spending, the lies, the misrepresentation had to be challenged. And most of those states, the people who fought that were successful for that time. You see now what happens when people walk away at the national level, what happens. And it destroys the foundation of prevention. It destroys the foundation of all the work we did. We worked on cocaine. We built on a lot of the initiatives that were going on. We reduced some of the supply of cocaine. We worked with international partners. We're now walking away from that. We worked on methamphetamine, which became a huge problem, and worked with communities and states that took the lead in controlling the precursor chemicals. But really, the real issue here is, I mean, talk about evidence-based practices. The evidence-based practice, or the evidence that's overwhelming, is we're legalizing marijuana. We have more reason to understand the damage it's going to do to the futures of our children, and we are walking away from that at the national level. I have a no-cost evidence-based way to do this that all of our presidents that we served under did, which is give a speech, tell the truth, provide some presidential leadership, and give the people who are out here working and trying to help more kids avoid the death and the path of destruction, give them some support. It's past time.
So John Walters talked about this very current issue on legalization and decriminalization of marijuana and outlined what he thought the current president ought to be doing about it. I'd be interested in hearing from the other panelists about what you think, if you're as concerned about this trend as we've heard others speak of this morning, and if so, what do you do about it when you find trend in public opinion they're going the other way? Maybe go down this way now.
Well, you know, first of all, I think both political parties are remiss here. They've abandoned the stage. I worked with a Democratic administration, a Republican-controlled Congress. So Denny Hastert and Newt Gingrich and Orrin Hatch and all sorts of people over there supported me not just with money and budget authority, but also spoke out publicly. And I found that, you know, as I worked around the country, the nation's governors were there. They understood the issue. You have to have a screw loose to think that it's not a danger to your business to have your employees on drugs or your children or your sports team. So we had more of a broad gauge national leadership commitment to this issue. I think nowadays these politicians are looking at it and they're finding, my number is 15% of the population intensely want drugs legalized, particularly marijuana, but this is the only step one of a Darwinian process in which all drugs will be available. And I think the political parties have backed off and say, if I'm visible on this issue, these people are going to vote me out of office. So they're intimidated. Just an astonishing state of affairs. So without that national leadership, I can't imagine how we're going to pull this thing together. The last thing, by the way, we got going for us is this organization, which is in communities across America. Thank God for them.
Lee Brown, what do you think?
I think there is an answer. There's a way forward. As a police chief in several cities, I pioneered the concept of community policing. The concept's very simple. The police can't do it alone. The community can't do it alone. When you put the two together, you have an awesome force to bring about change and deal with the issues of crime and violence and drugs. The same thing is applicable here. With this organization, that's a good example of that. If you work in the local communities addressing the issues there, involving your religious leaders, your business leaders, your civic organizations, pulling them all together to achieve a common goal, I think we can make a significant difference in the impact on the problem. But you have to also educate people. The legislators need educating on this issue. And that can be done by, again, organization, by involving the entire community that understands the impact of the problem and then moving together to do something about it. This is what this organization has been doing for 25 years, and it's a good example of what can be done.
Bill Bennett, you've been uncharacteristically patient, so... Well,
taking my turn.
Yes.
I went to Catholic school.
Yeah. Well, please.
Don't want to get my fingers wrapped. CADCA is one of the great organizations out there. These are some of the greatest people in the world when it comes to saving lives of children. It's too much to ask CADCA to save this country, however, and to save this country from drugs. It needs to be done on all levels, starting with the presidential level. Mr. Botticelli said the Office of National Drug Control Policy works from the president. Let's be very clear. Where the hell is the president on this issue? He is nowhere. He is... This is my position. This is not CADCA's position. I don't know if it's these guys' position. But they certainly serve presidents who spoke out on this. George Bush, who we heard from earlier, I asked him to go to Kansas City to see 1,000 black men together in the streets. He went. I asked him to go to Los Angeles to see what the LAPD was doing at the local street level. He went. I asked him to go to Colombia, to Barranquilla, and Cartagena to meet with people, to talk about things that need to be done. He went. We were on the trip, and James Baker said, "Who the hell's idea was this?" I said, "It's mine. It's important the president be here." The president went. He gladly went. This president, to my knowledge, has given not a single speech about drugs, not a single one. It does not appear in the State of the Union. He has made 2 comments about drugs that I could find publicly on the record. One is to say, I think marijuana is probably not as bad or any worse than the cigarettes and stuff I smoked when I was in high school. Not helpful, Mr. President, not helpful in the least. Second comment he made was about the White House chef. That dessert was so good, he must put crack in there or something. If he had any experience or any real-world experience, which you think he would have as a community organizer, with crack and with other drugs, he wouldn't be making flip comments. That's the mad part. Here's the sad part. Here's the sad part as a teacher. No president that I can think of had a rapport on being elected with young people like this president. This guy, when elected, was adored by young people of all colors, of all races. But people, 18 to 25, 35, this was their president. We know that from the demographics. He had a unique opportunity to talk to the young people about the dangers they are facing, and he has avoided it over and over and over again, and it is to great cost. And it's not good enough to say, well, we'll have the funding and we'll do this, and then we'll throw it to CADCA. Botticelli said, your voice can go from this room, to the street, to the city, to the country. There is one voice that starts in the country and for the country and speaks for the country, and that's the President of the United States, and we need that voice.
So, very tough words.
Better? Is that what you wanted? I'm just getting started. All right.
Pretty tough statements about President Obama, and I wanted to give the other three panelists a chance to weigh in if you want to agree or disagree.
Let me just sort of add, though, because I don't think it's just a failure of presidential leadership. I don't think it's just the fact that I have not heard one word out of Vice President Biden, who used to be sort of chairman of the board for my effort on the Hill. I would, categorically say in the last year or two in particular, I have not heard one mayor, one governor, one senator stand up in public and say that this is outrageous, the legalization of marijuana. For 13 years, we had adolescent drug use coming down. For 5 years, it's been going up. And primarily, by the way, that wasn't just this goofy initiative in the state of Washington and Colorado. It was medical pot. If medical pot's okay, then how can you possibly have a no drug use policy with your family? And I don't think the politicians have stood up and addressed the issue.
Why do you think that's happened?
True. I think they're afraid of this is sort of like a single issue burning motivational factor in maybe 15% of the people. And if you're the sheriff and you're strong on the issue, they might vote you out of office. I think that's what's going on. We have politicians who lack principle and courage of their principles on this issue.
Well, wait a minute. It's a factual correction. John and Walters can help here, too. There are such people speaking out. Andy Harris, Maryland, Dr. Harris has been speaking out emphatically. Charles Grassley, Senator Grassley from Iowa, who the group will meet later this week, has been speaking out. I'll give you a Democrat from an interesting state. John Hickenlooper from Colorado said this was ridiculous and reckless. We should have never done this legalization. Good for him.
I think we have to also look at the age group of many of our elected officials right now. Many grew up at an age where they use some type of drug, particularly marijuana, and therefore they have a political reluctance to speak out on it. That's what I found throughout my years involved in this business.
Mm-hmm. And let me give you a chance, John Walters, to close out this particular topic.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's incredibly fruitful to blame people. I think there is blame here, but I don't think people are going to change. People in this audience, some of whom I saw when I was in office, I got a chance to say hello to briefly as I walked in, and many of the people they represent are speaking out, and they're trying to fight against an enormous tide that's getting stronger because of the millions of dollars that the industrial dope industry is generating and will continue to generate on the current path. You have to, unfortunately, you do have to stop it. This is like the story of Colonel Chamberlain at the Little Round Top. You are the end of the line, and unfortunately, a big part of your government and your society has let you down, and we're going to let our children down if we don't speak out. We can do some of this. Bill Bennett has a new book out. Many of you speak about this when you get an opportunity. I've done a little bit of this I didn't intend to come back to just because I thought there were other things that I should be spending my time on. But you have to do this. We have to do this. And we're going to have to try to help and push people in Congress to speak, people at the local level. Many of you do this. We're going to have to redouble our efforts. We're going to have to fight people in the press and online that talk about marijuana being safe or marijuana being medicine. And we're going to have to be willing to take the ridicule of those who have a lot of friends who are making money, are misguided, are dogmatic, or whatever, and tell them they're wrong, they're hurting people, and put up with that abuse. I have three things I would suggest that you do concretely. One, find a way to work with your local law enforcement and test the marijuana that is in your community. There's no question from what we do see in places like Denver and others where they test it, there's all kinds of stuff in this marijuana. In addition to the poison of cannabis, there's mold, there's pesticides, there's herbicides, there's all kinds of other stuff. Put out the word that this is poisoned. That may give people second thoughts. Secondly, I think what we need to do is really make an effort to try to bring our friends in the legal profession into this. I wrote an article with a friend of mine about this. In your states where you have extensive big business, it's time to bring tort attorneys in and trying to find the people who are their victims and sue them. Take the money away from them now before they get stronger. If you can find good attorneys that want to do it, fine. If you can find attorneys that simply want to take money That's fine too, because let's just use the sharks to kill the wolves. Thirdly, and I know this is harder, we started an initiative on this regard when I was in office. I know it's hard in many of your communities, but the safest thing you can do where you can do it, and every life is precious and we need to live that, is get random testing in schools. It is the only way to create a climate where kids feel safe. Not to catch them, you have to build, as those of you who have worked on this know, you have to build the ability to take the children who you find test positive and get them treatment and care and get the support to their families, sometimes where those families have intergenerational substance abuse. You have to be willing to build that. But that is the way to stop the path to addiction and death. That is the way to stop and reduce the numbers for suicide. That is the way to stop the entry into gangs and violence and other paths of self-destruction. If you want to talk about evidence-based research, it is overwhelming in that category. We need to make the case we've made in the military, to make the case we've made in the workplace, and make the case that will save more lives in an environment that's going bad in the society in general. It's not a substitute, but you can create enclaves of safety for young people, especially if you have to use it after a tragedy, hopefully before, but if after, let's not keep building the number of dead and injured children.
Barry McCaffrey.
Well, first of all, I endorse fully what John's saying. I think remaining passive in the coming 5 years would be a terrible mistake. I wanted to flag your attention to the work of a brilliant young scholar, Dr. Kevin Sabet, who I think probably all four of us know. He's put together an organization called SAM, Smart Approach to Marijuana. And I think the bottom line is, and the organization called Friends of NIDA, we're going to talk to Dr. Nora Volkow about it. We've got to capture objective scientific data on what comes out of all this. And I don't think there's any question in my mind what's going to come out of it is increasing rates of drug abuse among adolescents. So part of that is find out about Kevin Sabet, support his work, and let's back NIDA in collecting data.
We want to, I'm sorry, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a point of emphasis and agreement, because I guess I'm clearly the oldest here. Well, I don't know.
You are.
I am. Thanks, it's unanimous. I asked Justice Holmes how he felt on being 90. He said, I feel like there are fewer and fewer people to whom I must defer. So that's sort of where I am. But I will say this in terms of what was just said. In 89, 90, when I was there first, we had some evidence. We had some studies. We didn't have the evidence and studies we have now. It is overwhelming. I'm starting this book tour today with my co-author, Going to Pot. The really unbelievable thing, given what Barry said, John has said, and Lee has said, is that this is even an argument. Worse, that the public is buying it. 60% of the public believing in legalization. The science is overwhelming, and we cite it in the book. We reprint an article from New England Journal of Medicine. If we'd had this stuff in 89, 90, it would have been great to have it. But now the state of the art is extraordinary. And to make the case that no harm here, it's just innocuous fun. First of all, when you get into this debate, a lot of people from the 60s, 70s, Lee was saying, well, I took it, it wasn't a problem. That's THC of 3%. We're talking about THC of 15, 20, sometimes 25 and 30%. We got pictures in the book of some of this stuff, one of them called Gupta. He's another person who needs to be talked to about this, saying, Dr. Gupta, how do you feel about a distinguished career, and he's had one, helping veterans in Iraq, and you end up having a 20.3 THC nugget of marijuana named after you. Go for a better legacy, Dr. Gupta. You're a better man than that. But we're talking about high-potency marijuana. If you don't think it is, ask Maureen Dowd how she felt that Sunday morning in the Denver hotel. Ask Mrs. Curcio, who was written up in the Washington Post. Her son came home, friend came with her, with a chocolate bar. She thought it was a chocolate bar. She took a bite. She ends up in the emergency room. Are we kidding? I mean, we got to be crazy to be saying throw this stuff into circulation. Final point, Dr. Wolf Dr. Casey Wolf, pediatric psychiatrist in Denver, we talked to in the course of writing this book. She said, all I see now, she has a Medicaid practice, are kids coming in on marijuana, little kids, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We say to the parents, why are they on marijuana? So I don't give it to them, but it's legal, You can make a law that says you can't use it at 18, but if the law says it is legal, it is permission, it is a green light, and that's what the parent says in response. So they're winning, and there's no question they're winning. We've got to mount a very strong offensive in Washington, in CADCA, in the states, across the country. We're going from here to New York to Denver next week, and I hope we get out of Denver, but we're going to Denver.
We want to take some... We want to take some questions from you. If you have a question, send it on Twitter to #CADCA Forum. Here's one. Shouldn't our current prescription drug problem be treated as any other epidemic, such as polio or measles? That comes from Tricia Stouch. And of course, it's been, the crackdown on prescription drugs has had the unintended consequence of fueling heroin problems. What's your view on what we should be doing on prescription drugs? John Walters, start with you.
Well, I think we have shown, with the help of some of the people and the people they represent in this audience, that we can educate people about the dangers of prescription drugs, the access that young people get, and the people who get into abuse through regular medical care. We've done training and try to do assistance for medical professionals as well. But we've told people to get these medications out of supervised medicine cabinets and how to destroy them. We have additional efforts to make in that regard. I do think that this is another place where we need to continue to educate people, and we have to remember, as you people all know, that every young generation doesn't come with the experience of the previous generation. You have to do it again. But I do think we've seen some leveling off. There's still too much abuse, and again, we've seen movement, as you point out, between substances. And but again, look, I think we also ought to be clear and not try to, just mention everything. It starts with marijuana today. It starts with marijuana in almost all cases. And if we don't cut off that entry point, we are not going to make progress against these other forms of substance abuse. It is not the only thing to do, but it is the thing you must do if you are going to really change the face of this problem today.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this question?
The successes we had dealing with prescription drugs, by the way, are astonishing. That was the 500% increase addiction rate that just exploded out of nowhere, primarily OxyContin, but also Percocet, Percodan, other synthetic opiates with a tremendous value in pain management and medicine. But there's been new legislation. The DEA focused on it with really a ferocity that was unbelievable. And in the last 2 years, I spent a lot of time in and out of the treatment community. We've seen a marked change. But as John says, we don't care what drug you're using, for God's sakes. We care about a stone drug lifestyle. So the fact they're going back to heroin now, which is cheaper and more readily accessible than the state of Florida supplied OxyContin, shouldn't make us too happy. The bottom line, and I would agree with John also, I wouldn't say just marijuana. I'd say marijuana, ecstasy, and beer in adolescence. If you can stop or delay that kind of behavior, you end up with a healthier population.
We had an earlier Twitter question, which is not now up on my screen, from someone asking if the CADCA programs were aiming at too old an age group, if it ought to be not aimed at teenagers. Here it is. We target youth 12 to 18 to impact when most students start using, but do you think it would make more sense to target kids 9 to 12? That comes from Yagi 74. Applause from the audience. What do you think? As kids as young as 9 ought to be the target of CADCA programs?
I would think so. I think the earlier you start, to get a handle on the problem, the better off you are as these kids get older. I take myself as an example. I spoke to my kids at a very early age, and as a result, they were educated about the harms of any type of drug use, whether it's prescription drugs, which I see as a big problem today in addition to marijuana. But I think the key to all of that we're talking about has to be education and prevention. As I said, I came from a law enforcement background and worked as an undercover narcotics cop. I'd buy drugs and arrest later on the offender. Heading police agencies where we arrested thousands of people every year. And it didn't take long to realize you can't arrest yourself out of this problem. What you have to do is have a program, an extensive program in prevention, education prevention. But we also have to include in that treatment. When I served in the office of the director, one of the major disappointments I had, I couldn't get all the money I needed from our legislator for a hardcore drug initiative. Now, I don't know how you can get an addict off of drugs except through treatment. And we need to have the resources in order to accomplish that objective as well.
I think Lee would agree, because I think the evidence is so overwhelming that often there's that arrest or that act of coercion which gets that person on the right track.
And they should receive treatment even if they're incarcerated.
Exactly, when incarcerated. Our former mayor of Washington, D.C., famously said, "I didn't see the light until I saw the law." David Crosby didn't get clean until he was in a Texas jail. We know most people go into treatment because they are forced to by a cop like Lee or a doctor or a wife or an employer because you don't want to give up drugs. It's fun. It makes you feel good. So it is some element of coercion. Could I bring up a happy point?
Please.
Just because it's pretty grim. And as I said, I think right now we're losing the marijuana thing, but we can win it. People say, counsel of despair, there's nothing you can do about this. We started talking about cocaine. That's when I came in. 1979, 10% of 18 to 25-year-olds reported cocaine use. In 1979, 10%. By 1994, it was down to 1.2%. Country really went to town on this, didn't like it. A lot of communities got burned out by crack cocaine, too. But people said, no cocaine. We got in the movies, and the culture helped. The Partnership for Drug-Free America helped. Richard Gere says to Julia Roberts in the movie Pretty Woman, she's in his bathroom, remember she's a prostitute. He says, if you're brushing your teeth, fine. If you're doing drugs, get out of there. Whoa, Hollywood's sending a positive message. Maybe do it again once every 10 years. What the hell? And get this, for the problem at issue today, in 1979, 35% of 18 to 25-year-olds reported using marijuana. 18 to 25-year-olds, 35%. 15 years later, it was down to 12%. That's a huge decline. Is that going to zero? No, but 35 going to 12 is going the right direction.
General McCaffrey.
Probably something that needs to be underscored, too, when you're dealing with this chronic abuse community. Pick a study you believe in, 12 million, 14 million Americans, fairly small percentage of the population. One of the most successful things we've encountered, probably any of us, is the drug court system. And, I think when I came in office, there were a dozen of them, and Janet Reno had me go down and be a student of Judge Stanley Goldstein in Florida. This remarkable military police, reserve sergeant major, lawyer, judge. I listened to what they did. Before we came out of office, we had 1,000 drug courts. Now there's 3,000 drug courts. And our experience has been basically that 80% of the people that end up in that drug court program end up with markedly changed drug-taking behavior. So it's something else to support and endorse.
John Walters.
Yeah, not to kill the optimism here, but to go back to prevention, as you all know, and I'm not sure we have a strategy for this, unfortunately, it's a matter of how do you give true and healthy messages to young people in a blizzard of unhealthy and destructive messages. And it is much worse than when we were in office. I mean, you saw the recent report about how much on Twitter is about marijuana. You type it into a search engine, look what you see. Look at the way this is now being advertised in the Denver Post as something to be used as candy, as cartoon characters, as fruit juices. You're fighting with this on the front line. Some of you are in the belly of the beast. Some of you are on the periphery of the beast, but it's coming for us. So the question really is, how do you get prevention messages that have staying power and traction when it's 100 to 1 against you? You talked about younger kids. They're on these social media as well. And the social media, it's not a fair fight. We're getting clobbered. You know that. So we have to find ways of trying to have some connection to young people that makes a difference, to get some help with peer-to-peer efforts. And I admire the young people who are here who are trying to do that. But we need to change that environment, or we just are teaching our children to use drugs.
You know, Lee Brown made an interesting point the last time he spoke, which was talking about a disappointment when you're a drug czar and getting funding for the hardcore treatment programs. And it's a given that each of you have many accomplishments that you can cite during your time as drug czar. But could you name something that was disappointing to you that you wish you could have done, and for whatever reason you weren't able to? John Walter, start with you.
Well, I mean, where we sit today, I mean, I wish we would have stopped the medical marijuana, which was the camel's nose under the tongue. We fought individual ballot initiatives, but the real problem was to make people face the fact that this was a fraud. It's not legitimate medicine. It should not be accepted. You should not be able to trade on the decent compassion of human beings to send others to destruction. It's just outrageous. And now we have to fight that battle over again. I understand there are elements of cannabinoids that can be used in medicine. We all support that. The federal government supports that. That's not the issue. The issue is saying that something is abusive and is going to make people millions of dollars is good for people. That's a damnable lie, and that has to be stopped.
Barry McCaffrey, a disappointment during your tenure?
Well, I think the easiest thing to do on the drug issue is to talk to parents, pediatricians, ministers, coaches, and say, look, if you talk to your children about drug abuse, it'll have an impact. I mean, and literally CADCA is the center and heart of that. It's pretty hard to find people who will argue against that message, although currently it's happening. I think one of the toughest challenges we had was dealing with the several million Americans who are chronically addicted. And the stigma and the antipathy, I used to tell people the only person that doesn't give up on a drug addict is your mother. Everyone else fades away, employers, friends, etc. So creating an atmosphere, and by the way, we know exactly how to deal with chronic drug addiction. We have science-based protocols. We can get people into recovery. But you have to fund them. You have to organize it. It can't be under a bridge somewhere in downtown. You have to get people in their career. It's an industry. To do that requires political support. So I thought we barely moved the needle on dealing rationally with drug addiction.
Interesting, similar to the point that Lee Brown made. Bill Bennett, how about you? A disappointment during your tenure?
Yeah, two of a different order. They're public now, so I can talk about them. One, Department of Agriculture created a bug, a hybrid bug, an actual insect that loved coca, loved the coca leaf.
For a reason, or just for fun?
Just yeah. was raised to love coca, like we've been raised to love pizza. And whenever it saw coca, it ate it. And we could produce hundreds of thousands or millions of these, pass them to our friends in Colombia and Venezuela. Problem is, it loved everything else there. So would kill the flower crop. John will remember this. Would kill everything else. But it's an idea. More serious, and this was a serious thing and a big disappointment. We had a plan in coordination with the government of Colombia to use American resources and take out the 4 cocaine processing plants in Colombia on a Saturday night. And we could have done it in a period of a few hours. We had approval from the Colombian government. We just had to do it. It would have stopped the shipment of cocaine or coca for 6 months, which would have dramatically affected supply, drove up the price. You would have had much effect on emergency room admissions. There would have been something like a substantial halt in the supply of cocaine. And again, remember, we were after that. Big fight in the cabinet, sub-cabinet meeting about this. My side lost by 1 vote. But it would have been interesting to see if we'd been able to pull it off. I mention that because there are many dimensions to the drug issue. And that was one of them, because you could see when we dramatically, a lot of people think this is a hopeless task. It's not. When you dramatically interfere, substantially interfere with the flow of something like cocaine into this country, it is reflected in emergency room admissions. It's reflected in price in the street. And one of the things that really pleased me during our tenure and beyond, these guys, the capture of people who are being celebrated around the world as the most successful criminals in history. And thanks to the U.S., a group called Delta Force, which is nobody you want to mess with, and Colombian government, brave Colombian officials, we got almost all those guys. That was justice. That was a good thing.
In the sub-cabinet meeting, the people who were against taking this step, why were they against it?
They thought it would cause another international incident. The word that came up was Vietnam. We'll be engaged in a country, we'll be engaged in it forever. We weren't sending troops. We were sending helicopters. It was one night. We had the permission of the Colombian government.
In talking about drug cartels, I'm reminded that last month in an interview, the former Mexican president, Felipe Calderón, blamed the United States for Mexico's drug violence. He said if the U.S. reduced its demand for drugs, it would drive Mexico's drug lords out of business. Is he right?
I always thought that was one of the stalest arguments I ever heard in my life. And his predecessor was even worse. I listened to it. I was on an international streaming video debate out of Oxford where his predecessor said Mexico was a victim, that they barely produced drugs. It was ridiculous. The problem with facing Mexico, Colombia, and the United States is largely the same one. The United States is a giant drug-producing nation, whether it's methamphetamines or industrial-strength marijuana or diverting legal narcotics, Percocet, OxyContin. We're a drug-producing nation. By the way, if you're a Canadian, you would view us as a drug transit nation. With all the cocaine comes up, Interstate 5 and right into Canada. Then conversely, when you start looking at drug abuse rates, Mexico has a problem less than ours, but growing rapidly. So we ought to have a common concern about adolescents in the workforce and corruption in government, that sort of thing. So I think when any of the political leadership says, if it wasn't for your noses, we wouldn't be creating cocaine. And conversely, similarly, for the United States to turn around and say, if you people weren't growing coca leaves in the Chapari Valley, we wouldn't be using it. It's just nonsense. The problem is drug addiction, and what are you going to do about it?
I think it's hard for us because we're rightly concerned about our communities. But it's important to have some, as these gentlemen know, care about foreign leadership. Two of them were outstanding. One was President Uribe in Colombia, who worked with the United States at great risk to himself and changed the face of his country, not just the face of cocaine, the face of his country to make it safer, more democratic, a real country, and the face of these criminal organizations that had been there for a long time. It was important that we stood with them, but you can't substitute for leadership. Secondly, there was a president of Mexico that I worked with, President Calderón, who also took great risks and fought back in his country and made a difference. So when we have allies that we can work with, and we have had some, it creates a global solution to a global problem, or at least a regional solution to a regional problem. And it's important to remember when you hear about, well, it's all the drugs. It's not all the drugs. I mean, the criminal organizations, as these gentlemen know, in these countries, whether it's in Mexico or in South America, are multidimensional mafias. They do kidnapping, they do protection rackets, they do human smuggling, they do all these things. And if you take the drug money away, they do other things to compensate for it. You're not going to put them. It's about rule of law, it's about justice, it's about democracy, and you have to make criminal gangs go away by taking them and making it impossible for them to continue. And yes, we should stop and reduce our drug use, but General McCaffrey's right. There's a great deal of drug use in South America and in Europe and in the rest of the world. So the issue is, in part, we need to both change use in places that don't really have resources for treatment in some cases, but try to do that. But also we have to change production. That's what's going to happen with industrial dope here. The profit from drug dealing is now going to be turned into indoctrinating young people, as it already is, and communities, that this is okay and the damage is tolerable, and don't look at it, and if you do, you're going to be ridiculed. That's the danger here. We have to attack it, and we have to attack it effectively. And I regret to say that you don't have a lot of allies in this, but you have each other, and you've got to build those allies, and may God bless you for your work.
So, did you want to add something?
I have a joke at the end.
At the very end or right now?
The very end.
The very end? Okay. We'll build anticipation for that moment.
Hope it's funny.
Yeah, better be. You know, the bar gets higher the more anticipation
Yeah, I know you
builds.
do. I know.
Yeah,
I know.
So.
Let me piggyback on what
Yes,
you
please,
said.
go ahead.
We paint a very bleak picture of the drug problem. I believe that there is an answer, and the answer is the community at the local level working together to achieve an objective. And that's what this organization has been doing for 25 years. SAM's been doing it for a lesser number of years on the issue of marijuana. I'm a strong believer that if we can mobilize our local resources, we can make a difference. And again, that involves all elements of our local resources, our religious community, our business community, our civic associations, our schools, our educators. Get them all involved. I think that's a powerful force to bring about a difference.
Here's a question from Live Big One. I don't know if that's a man or a woman, so whoever it is. How do we get local DAs to prosecute and enforce drug laws like underage smoking? Lee Brown, you started out as a cop on the beat. Is there a way to get local DAs to do that, and would that be a smart thing to do?
Well, local DAs are elected officials, and keeping that in mind, enforcing the smoking laws is not a priority on their list. In addition to that, what comes into the DA comes in from the law enforcement. The police feeds into the DA. If the police are not enforcing laws of dealing with teenage smoking, it's not going to get to the DA to begin with. So it's not just something that a DA can control. And I'm not sure that the DAs are going to spend a lot of their time on that because of political reasons. And I'm not sure the police are going to spend a lot of their time on it for resource reasons. So I'm not sure that's going to be accomplished.
John Walters.
I don't disagree, but I do think some of you have seen know this. This is not hard to do because you don't have to be comprehensive. What you have to do is have some very visible, particular examples that you do enforcement on, and you'll have a chilling effect on the rest of the bad actors. The same is true with underage alcohol sales as it is with smoking. Find some flagrant violators and work with these folks. They don't have to spend a lot of resources. Prosecute one or two and get a couple of local news crews, you know how to do this, and make them all stop. I mean, if they don't stop, make them the next target. You may need 2, you may need 3, but I'll bet you don't need 50 because they're going to stop because they just don't want to face the fines.
You know, local TV cameras is one way to get the attention of local DAs, has been my experience. Mm-hmm. Michael Botticelli, when he was here, he talked about the budget. Budget came out yesterday, the president's new proposed budget, and in it, the budget funding for supply reduction, primarily law enforcement efforts, accounts for 55% of his budget in this area. Demand reduction gets 45%, just $12.3 billion. Is that about in an era of scarce resources, you might argue that the funding should be bigger. Is that about the right balance between those two enterprises, Bill Bennett? Oh, Barry McCaffrey.
Let me sort of add this. I thought the the argument over percentages of the federal government that are alleged to be going to these various programs is a canard from the start. Most of the work done dealing with the drug issue, first of all, occurs at local level. It's state funded, it's county funded, it's private funded. The damage, when we see people in treatment, it's insurance programs paying for it, not a federal grant. And then I think the other part of it is when you look at the federal government's job, of course they're supposed to do law enforcement, border control, international cooperation, law enforcement, without which how would this society hang together? So the notion that the federal government should be the primary source of funds for treatment and prevention, I thought has been a wrong-headed one. Sort of add to Lee's point, you know, if I had a choice of putting somebody on TV at night to talk about the drug issue, I'd say, let's not have the police chief or the sheriff. Let's have a high school principal, a pediatrician, a mother. That's who the voice of the anti-drug movement ought to be, not law enforcement. So I'm skeptical about the current administration's budget, by the way. I'm going to go down and try and sort out the numbers and figure out where it's really going. But I think we have grossly inadequately funded at the federal level the work of SAMHSA, NIDA, and other agencies.
This is a bit of a technical issue. We all know too much about how the budget works. and most of the people here, from my look historically, fought a lot of battles inside both the executive branch and the legislative branch to not inflate things with estimates and everything else. I did the most radical, learning from my predecessors, reduction of the budget to really things that the federal government managed and could work with localities on. The Congress didn't like that. It wanted to inflate the budget back, and you now have an inflated budget with proxies for what a program might spend. A lot of this is estimates from the Affordable Care Act and the current budget. Nobody's actually managing that. There's an estimate. Now, it is a real cost, but if you wanted to say, how do I deliver money to people who are working in Denver, where I have something I want to do it, that makes a difference. We don't talk about that. And we need to talk about that if we're going to be serious about what the money's really going to, or how do we deliver money to people who are helping our allies overseas that are really making a difference. That's what these men and I tried to do when I was in office. The real issue is the money's used to confuse you, to say, look, I'm a good person because I proposed money. Did you fight for it? Is it right-headed? Are you making a difference? In all those cases, the answer today is no.
So we're almost out of time, unfortunately, because this has been such an interesting discussion. And the best thing is apparently when you ask you guys a question, you answer it. This is rare in Washington. Maybe it's because we're outside the city limits. Since we're here at the 25th anniversary of CADCA, I wonder if you could just briefly give your best piece of advice to the people in this room, the thing they could do that would make the most difference, just quickly. And we'll just go down, start with John Walters.
Find strategies to attack marijuana and the arguments made to the children. You know that.
Barry McCaffrey.
I think at the end of the day, the only thing that counts in life is what your parents, your coach, your homeroom teacher, your minister says to you. So I think the centerpiece of this entire argument is for adolescents between the 6th grade and the 12th grade. Are they hearing scientifically correct, facts-based arguments from people they trust and love that say, in this family, on this team, in this school, we're not smoking dope, we're not binge drinking beer, we're instead playing sports and doing healthy activities. I think the center part of it.
Lee Brown, what's your best piece of advice to this group?
Well, having served on CADCA's board at one time, my advice is keep doing what you've been doing. Working at the local level to bring about substantive change in the issue of drug abuse.
And Bill Bennett, you have the last word.
Yeah, keep doing what you're doing, echo Lee. Sometimes you work in obscurity, sometimes you work with recognition, but keep going to work. As a Catholic, I'm authorized to tell you, for your work, you will not have to go to purgatory when you die, because you're in it. Can I do my laugh thing?
We are ready for your joke.
First of all, a true story, marijuana story. John Walters, remember this. I was asked to go to Alaska where they were reconsidering re-legalizing 2 ounces personal possession. I was testifying in Juneau. and Anchorage. We had, I think, 150 marshals for security because we were told all of the opposition was going to be there. Normal was going to be out in force, not particularly dangerous people, but they were going to be there in force, and the marshals were worried. We got out there, we did the testimony, we came back, we didn't see anybody. A week later, we found out why. When they did their posters, they had me there 2 days later. My statement was, I told you this stuff makes you stupid. I told you this stuff makes you stupid. The joke I got yesterday on the radio show was they are reconsidering the legalization initiative in Washington because of the play call on the 4-yard line. The 1-yard line, you don't throw a pass. What are they smoking out there in Seattle? So it makes a difference. It's here.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being with us. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was really good. And now don't walk out because we're going to bring General Dean back for some concluding remarks. Thank you.
So on behalf of CADCA, our board of directors, it would be remiss of us if we didn't stop for a moment to thank Susan Page for the wonderful job she did this morning. Please thank her. Thank her. Come on. Thank you. Also, it's so critical that we pay thanks to our former drug czars. They were outstanding, gave us great advice. Thank you very much. I want to also thank the acting director, Michael Bonicelli, for coming over this morning as well and his insights and for his leadership as well. It's really, really great. So I hope you all agree with me that we're off to a great start. Do you agree? Huh? You know, if we don't remember our past and let it guide us, we are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. So we wanted you to hear from those who led this fight personally so that we might benefit from their insights and their leadership as we chart the future and accept the mission of building communities to raise drug-free kids. That's our charter. And if you look and listen to the comments that they made, many of them referred to that as being what's important to us. So I know that you in this room are ready to accept this mission, and the mission, in fact, is possible. To achieve the mission, CADCA changed coalitions all across America and around the world to implement data-driven strategies. Just one piece of information I want to give you quickly is the University of Michigan has been Michigan State University has been evaluating our work at the National Community Coalition Institute for the last 12 years. I just received an executive summary of the evaluation data from last year. And I want to report to you that they told us that when you coalitions go through our Coalition Academy, complete the requirements, put in place all of the tools that you are required to complete, that we can see evidence in your community that are leading to change in your community in as early as 6 months. So that is really something you should be very proud of. And that's why we're working so hard to train so many of you, not just in the U.S., but around the world, and continuing to build community coalitions and giving you the opportunity to implement in your communities these strategies. We have a lot to do this week. It's all designed by you and with the help of the CADCA Coalition Advisory Committee. So we want you to have a wonderful time in your training sessions. We want you to have a wonderful time as you venture off to Capitol Hill tomorrow. We want you to be involved in all of the activities that lead up to our National Leadership Awards luncheon on Thursday. All of this in the 80-plus training sessions are designed for you to reflect, to grow, to learn, to be recharged, and to go back into your communities to continue this great fight. It's important to do that. I have just 4 short videos. Please hang in there with me. They're very, very short, but they're going to summarize and tell you what we are all about. And I want to start with Janine Coffer from the Republic of Washington. Run the video.
Hello, my name is Anand Ghosh. I'm from the Seriously Coalition from Chelsea, Michigan. And my biggest success story is that in Chelsea, Michigan, after medical marijuana laws were passed, the rates of kids who do marijuana went up by 384%. But now we've dropped it down to 4 out of 5 kids in Chelsea have never touched marijuana.
Okay, I got ahead of myself. Now we're going to hear from Janine from Republic of Washington.
Hi, my name is Janine Koffel, and I'm the Coalition Coordinator for the Republic Reducing Alcohol and Drug Use Coalition, RRAD. And there are a couple things that I'm really excited and proud about. One is that our coalition has the wisdom to send 5 youth to this conference where they've had the opportunity to develop a problem, they've identified their problem, they've identified their risk factors, and now they've narrowed it down to a couple of local conditions. And I know that by the end of the week, they're going to have an actionable logic model and plan to deal with underage use of marijuana in our state, which is Washington. And that's important to me because we have legalized recreational marijuana. And I'm proud of the fact that my kids are concerned and willing to buck the trend and step outside and be change agents in their community.
Terrific. Now we know that coalition leaders do change the environment. And when you change the environment, you change behaviors. So we have another wonderful short video from LaJean Burnett from Hot Springs, Arkansas.
My name is LaJean Burnett. I'm with Garland County Cares Coalition for Action, Recovery, Education, and Support in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And one of our major successes was where we were able to get all of our city parks tobacco-free. And one of our main things is Young Lungs at Play, and that allowed us to have the kids to be able to have healthy lungs. And the segue, the continuation of that is because of the e-cigarettes. We're also looking at making sure that e-cigarettes are also not allowed into our parks.
Okay, we have one final one, and from e-cigarettes to prescription drugs, CADCA provides prevention agents with the latest intel on trends and science-based strategies to silence the threat. And my good friend DJ Peterson from El Dorado Hills, California, is going to summarize that for us.
Hi, I'm DJ Peterson, Director of the El Dorado Hills Community Vision Coalition for Safe, Healthy, and Drug-Free Youth. Our success story is that with CADCA's support, our board, and our coalition partners, we have take-back programs for prescription drug use, alcohol compliance sales checks, and over 20 community and school partners that provide services every day for our youth to keep them safe, healthy, and drug-free. Our success is we've reduced alcohol use, binge drinking, and prescription drug use. So thanks to CADCA, our board, and our coalition partners, you're saving lives.
Okay, just a couple concluding remarks, and believe it or not, we are on time. We're supposed to finish at 10:30, and we got a couple of minutes before that time arrives. But you know and I know that coalitions are saving lives every day in your communities, at home and abroad. We've taken down some of the biggest public threats that exist. Alcohol, tobacco, use among our youth is down, as you heard. Yet, we still have a lot of work to do. We know that prescription drug abuse, whether it be prescription or over-the-counter, continue to be very, very difficult challenge. We all know the problems we are facing around marijuana. It's been discussed this morning. So we have work to do, and that's why we at your professional organization here in Washington has been doing this for 25 years, been building training events like this and others just for you to be able to go back into your communities to make all of this happen. It's so critical that you are with your states this evening when you plan your strategy to go to Capitol Hill, because we've been charged with, we have the important task of educating our legislators, and that's who we're going to be going to educate tomorrow on Capitol Hill. Please be a part of all that we're going to do the rest of the day. Please be back in mass. We're going to have members of Congress coming to speak to you tomorrow, and they need to see you. And I need you to be back in mass as you were this morning, so they can, in fact, do that before you leave to go to Capitol Hill. There's so many, many more things to do. And then we're going to take some time out on Wednesday. I want you to forget about your major activities going back in your community. I want you to put aside all of the challenges you're facing, and I want you to come dance with us. In fact, some of you might want to do the jerk. Some of you older types like me might want to do the mashed potatoes. But in fact, we're gonna dress up a little bit and have some fun and relax on Wednesday night. It's so critical that we do that, so please come join us. If you haven't picked up a very modest $25 ticket for the dance, they are still available at registration, so please do that. I'm going to take a chance and see if I can make a little comparison between a 007 agent and a coalition leader. And you'll have to judge and see how I'll do on this task. But you know, coalition leaders do share some of the key traits of Mr. Bond. You're fast on your feet. You agree? You are intensely loyal, as Mr. Bond was. And when it comes to our nation, youth, you never say die. So you really do. So your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to change your community. Mission possible. By changing your community, we can change the world. We are so excited to have you here to celebrate with us. Please enjoy the rest of the day. Be energized in your state meetings. Be back in mass tomorrow morning to greet our members from Congress. Charge, I might use that military term, charge Capitol Hill tomorrow afternoon to carry the message that so vitally needs to be heard on Capitol Hill. And let's have a wonderful time celebrating our coalitions who's going to graduate from the academy tonight. We're going to have a wonderful dance on Wednesday night, and we're going to send everybody off with our National Leadership Award luncheon on Thursday. Have a great week. Thank you very much.